I'm sitting inside tonight. Outside, of course, is coronavirus and the fear from that, but also outside is is looting and violence and anger and I'm thinking about George Lloyd, and I'm thinking about uh, uh, silence is violence, and I can't tell you how angry I was, and really broken I was by seeing yet another video of an African American man being abused in that way and killed by police officers that should be in jail and will be, I hope. But at the same time, it's important that we express, that we break our silence and express in ways that will actually deal with this problem. And let me express what I mean by that. We have uh, deep structural racism. We know that, we say that, but we rarely actually focus on the structural racism. We focus on the leaves, we focus on the outer limbs of racism, and we obsess on it. We need to do more than just go to protests to air our grievances against racism. We need to do that, absolutely, but we need to do more. The fight for racial justice, for justice overall, is led by the warriors right now. And we need the warriors. They hold us accountable to core principles. But we don't all need to be warriors as our primary means of battling racism, because the battle is not enough. There are many, many more of us who are problem solvers, bridge builders, peacemakers, what I call resolutionaries. We outnumber the warriors, as we should. The civilian population should outnumber the warriors. And our virtue is not in just joining the warriors and protesting with them. We can do that. There are times, absolutely. And right now is one of those times. But warriors need civilian partnership and oversight. That's why we've erred for that in this country. We need to be out there. But you don't see us, you don't hear from us. And there are not enough of us that are speaking out. Too many that just virtue signal by going and joining and expressing outrage. Virtue signaling is not enough and is often counterproductive because it suggests that we've actually done something. It's not that so much that we are not out here. It's not so much that we are not talking. It is that the political and media industry is not listening. And they're not listening for one core structural reason, and that is polarization is profitable. Fear is a profit driver. Hate is a profit driver. And we've allowed this to happen for too long. Raging against the exploitation of polarization, fear, and hate is not the way to undo that. It's the opposite. To be a resolutionary, to get to the systemic root of the problem, not to overthrow the system, but to fix the system, we have to recognize several things. We have to recognize where racism comes from. And not just one person or entity or party that is responsible, but all of them that are, because all of them play a role. So where does our racism come from? What are the structural roots? Number one, it's our public school system. A public school system that fundamentally is funded according to the property values of properties around the schools, which means that poor areas, first and foremost, get a bad deal. They don't get the money that they need to deal with a student population that is, if anything, in greater need of support than the student population in wealthier areas. You have lots of other advantages. So that's number one. On top of that, we have union overprotection of teachers, which means that we have excellent teachers, we have adequate teachers, and we have poor teachers. All of their jobs are protected in the same way. And the poor teachers, they don't get fired for the most part. They have to step over some lines to get fired. Sometimes it's not even the kinds of lines that actually have anything to do with educational quality. Those teachers fall out of the good schools, the well-funded schools, and they fall into the poor schools. And they end up teaching our young African Americans, Hispanics, and economically disadvantaged whites and so on. And so that becomes the double whammy for these kids. They're going to school, school is crap, and they're not learning the way that we have responsibility to make sure that they do. And then they grow up in a community where the second institutional structural 2x4 smashes them, and that's the criminal justice system. So we have a criminal justice system that in the same way profits from this kind of division. The criminal justice system is dominated by institutions, public prisons, private prisons, prison guard unions, political parties, and so on, that want people in prison. They want it because it's profitable. They make money when people are in prison. But what's the cheapest way to get people in prison? Well, you don't want to attack wealthy people who have lawyers who can fight you. You want to attack where there's a return on your investment. So we have drug laws, and this is astonishing to me. We've got drug laws that penalize folks that are addicted to cheap drugs more than the expensive cocktail drugs that the wealthy suburbs tend to go for. And so we've badly taught our African American sisters and brothers. I don't mean to say that in a pandering way, by the way. It kind of makes me sick when we do that. But we are all actually related in that way. We are all actually related in that way. So first we give them a crappy education. Then we leave them few job opportunities to really make money, except for those, wow, look at what the drug dealers are getting. Wow, they seem to have made it. And so that becomes the aspiration. Then we take young Black kids and we put them in prison for generations. It's the school to prison cycle. And that is criminal. That's what we've got to stop. And again, it's the institutions, it's government, it's labor unions, it's corporations. It's not one of them. It's all of them. And it's not that they are to blame, because we created the business model that they're operating on. So we need to change them. So what else? The racism of low expectations and victimization. That's one that I hear from my African American friends. And it's the experience that they have, the way they explain it to me. And as a white man, I'm not in a position to know it as intimately as they are. But when they are in a bad school and they're pushed forward in that bad school, that's the high performing students are pushed forward, even though they haven't gotten an adequate education, and they're plopped down into a school dominated by people that had superb educations, and they find it challenging, and they feel cheated. They feel lied to. Like, you said I was ready for this, and I wasn't, because I didn't get that preparation, because I didn't have that advantage. You plopped me down here, and they feel angry and cheated because we've defined them as victims that need to be helped. Number 4, this is a huge one. One-party domination. Joe Biden said it, and I don't blame him for this. Everybody says stupid things, and we need to be forgiven for saying stupid things, because if we can focus on the stupid thing and find out what it means, it gives us a path to a solution. So The African American community is dependent on one party, the Democratic Party. 80–90% of African Americans vote Democrat because they've got nowhere else to go. The Republican Party is pandering to white voters. They're pandering to, and by the way, I'm a Republican. So I blame my party for this, but not the party institution and not the people so much. This is bigger than us. It's bigger than us. You know, we're not the only ones to blame, but the Republican Party is pandering to white voters, and to fear of violence and thugs. I mean, look at all these terms we use just to express these ideas. So they're dependent on the Democratic Party. And what does that mean? It means the Democrats don't have to actually perform for them because there's nobody competing for their votes. They're not going to lose their votes by failing to raise the level of equity for African Americans. It's not that Democrats are evil people for continuing the oppression. They're just normal people that are not acting on the institutional sources of racism. So African Americans, just like environmentalists, like me, I'm a Republican environmentalist. You know, it's like illegal almost, and we got to depend on the Democratic Party to protect the environment, which means we got nobody basically really doing. We got the Democrats protecting the environment in ways that enrich their donor base, but that don't actually do the job. So we need both parties competing for the environmental votes, and we need both parties competing for African American votes. And for that, African Americans need to join the Republican Party, not leave it, not just vote for candidates that are not focusing on their interests, but be inside. Be inside. In fact, it's, you know, African American community tends to be more culturally conservative than the rest of the Democratic Party. It's only because they're trapped there that they stay there. Just because look at the alternative, for God's sakes. So that's my party's responsibility. We've got to be there. So the fifth is white saviorism and virtue signaling. Oh, this gets to me. White saviorism. I mean, you see it in all the movies and so on, but you know, white folk, we feel so guilty over about racism, and also so afraid to do anything about it that we signal our virtue rather than actually act on it. And so many like to play the white savior role. Here's the downtrodden person. I'm going to step forward. I'm going to stand in solidarity with them. I'm going to preach to my all-white audience the evils of African-American bigotry. And I'm going to ask, why don't we attract more people? I mean, I've heard this so many times. I'm in a room full of, 99% white folk, and people get up to signal their virtue by saying, isn't it a shame that this room is just full of white people, and shouldn't we go out there and gather them and teach them why it's important to care about what we care about so that they will be a part of our concerns. And I'm thinking, no, it's African American people are right out there. You can go to their community. You can join the organizations that they're a part of. And I do, by the way. I am in plenty of rooms that are 98% people of color. And boy, that's where you learn. That's where you learn. It's not a secret how to get us together. We each go. That's the point. So number 6 is the racism of denial. The racism of denial based on partisanship. It's not just a denial that racism exists. Of course, we know that. But it's a denial of where it comes from, and it's a denial of the responsibility of our own institutions. We live in a political system where half the people, on the conservative side, demonize government and government unions, and half the people demonize corporations and trade associations. Isn't it curious that we've divided an institution that really is integrated, government, unions, nonprofit associations, and so on, and we're pretending that it's different and that one is going to stop the other one. If we can just, I mean, isn't that convenient? Government is responsible. Public employee unions are responsible. Corporations are responsible. We're all responsible. We need to act on it. Number 7, the racism of them, of othering. My colleague John Powell at UC Berkeley calls attention to this. When we other, when we say them, when we say it's the police who are at fault, it's the president that's at fault, it's old white men who are at fault, it's young African-American men who are at fault, it's the feminazis that are at fault. When we other people and we define them out of individual existence by stereotyping them. Now, stereotypes are useful and valuable and important, actually, but they should never be applied to an individual, because no individual can stoop so low as to be just a stereotype. So that othering is just another form of racism. Excuse me. And that brings me to the final structural problem, and there are many more, I know, and that is the political media business model. This is not, again, to blame political or media people for this, but the business model is driven by polarization, hate, fear. That's what drives the eyeballs. So this video, this video of however many minutes probably be viewed by 4 people because it doesn't follow the narrative that drives the profits. What drives the profits is constantly replaying for us examples of anger, fear, hate. And that's what we see. So that's what we're seeing right now. This is becoming not about George Lloyd and about racism and certainly not about structural reform. I haven't heard a word about that. This is now it's now being turned into, of course, a political game. Law and order. It's going to all be about crime. It's going to all be about violence. And it's going to perpetuate racism. Why? Because it's profitable to do that. Is that because the people who are earning profit are evil? No, it's just because profit is like a magnet. It just draws our behavior. So the lesson that comes out of this for me is that we are all in this together. That is not to say, and I can see how people can get angry at the idea, well, you're not in this together with me because you don't experience what I experience. And it's true, we all have different experiences, and some of us benefit, some of us are harmed by racism. But boy, as a whole, racism is a scourge. It's the biggest blot on this nation's history, and we all have responsibility to do something about it. It's devastating. So we are all in this together. We're inside this country together. We're on this planet together. And we all have to do our parts. And our parts include primarily looking at ourselves and our own institutions, not the other ones out there that we can't do anything about or we can't do as much about, but our own institutions, no matter where we are. Look at those institutions, see what the flaws are. Where are the incentives screwed up? Where has racism of the past led to patterns that perpetuate even beyond the time that people feel personal racism or as much personal racism as we used to, and deal with that. Be a problem solver, be a bridge builder. I don't have to ask you to be one. You are one. 70% of us are problem solvers, bridge builders, peacemakers, resolutionaries. We need to step up. We need to take responsibility. We need to grow a different business model for politics, a different business model for media. It's a structural process. We're not going to look as virtuous because we're not out there just claiming virtuosity, but we can grow a system that is more virtuous, and we can feel good because of that. That's the objective. So I hope you will join together. Go to inthistogetheramerica.org, inthistogetheramerica.org, and help us to bring America together, not the place, but the idea that freedom and justice and prosperity and sustainability all are dependent on one another. They are not partisan positions. They are qualities that we can't live without. Well, we can live without, we can suffer without, but we can't persist as a healthy democracy. So I hope you will join us. Thank you.